United in the States. So this is a good time and place as any to process my feelings about the news coming out over the takeover. News is coming out pretty rapid fire now. Yesterday, we found out that Sheikh Jassim had dropped out of the bidding process to become owner of Manchester United. His bid was, I think, somewhere in the region of 5 to 5.5 billion, with an additional 1.5 billion on top, pledged towards investing in the team, the stadium, the training ground, etc. And Sir Jim, it turns out afterwards, it came out that the board was going to be voting on his proposal, which seemed to be the winning proposal, which was 25% of the club at $1.3 billion, or up to 25%, or sorry, up to $1.3 billion. So obviously a lot less money, but the key factor being that Sir Jim's plan kept the Glazers as part of the club. Not only part of the club, but they remain in control, at least, in the short term. It's still the weekend. There's news filtering out. There's some other news saying that Sir Jim's plan requires that he takes over, or his group takes over, the sporting department, and they run all the sporting decisions, and that will be, how it is in the short term. And I've heard rumors, but I don't know if it's confirmed or not, that, they are going to try to phase the Glazers out over time. Over how much time, who knows? I'm sure this will become more readily available in the next couple of days, especially when they vote on the proposal next week. But those seem to be the facts right now. Sheikh Jassim's plan for 100% ownership, immediate removal of the debt, and operating on a debt-free model moving forward, that failed. And Sir Jim Ratcliffe's plan of 25% of the ownership, 1.3 billion to the Glazers, and I guess whoever the other shares they're purchasing from, the Class A shares, which are the lower class. The Class B, the Glazers have, those are the voting class shares. The Class A shares are the ones you can buy on the New York Stock Exchange. From what I understand, they're going to be buying a combination of the two. But yeah, that's sort of the facts, surrounding that. As far as my feelings about the situation, then yeah, definitely, a little bit upset. The Qatar, Sheikh Jassim's bid, the Qatari bid, whatever you want to call it. It's hard to separate the two. Sheikh Jassim is an individual. He's not a representative of the Qatari government per se, but his father was prime minister, I believe, and his own personal wealth is something like 1.6 or $2 billion, not enough to buy the entire club. So the financing he's getting is most likely coming, from the Qataris as well. And the wealth of the club is probably linked to that country, similar to PSG. I mean, this is speculation. No one knows for sure, but it's hard to argue otherwise. And I think that was sort of the main drawback and the main complaint that most people had, is that they didn't want to be owned or state-owned, even if there is sort of like a figurehead, in between state ownership and, the club. But that was the feeling. And that's, I think, where people had most of their issues, was human rights from that point. Listen, Sir Jim Ratcliffe is the head of a petrochemical company that has its own issues as far as, morality and what's funding it and where the money comes from. They're not innocent as well. But I think people as a whole, from a comfort standpoint, I think they were more comfortable with Sir Jim as a person than they were with what, Sheikh Jassim represented, which is most likely state ownership. With that being said, my disappointment comes from the fact that, United did not need a, sugar daddy or a fairy godmother or fairy godfather, what do you want to call it, to be successful again. They just need the club to be able to be run on its own and to eliminate the factors that are holding the club back currently. So the problems with the debt that's on the club, the outstanding balance of transfer fees owned, all of that would have been eliminated immediately, which would have gotten rid of, financial fair play issues, as well as the club's operating revenue, rather than part of it going to, servicing the debt and stuff like that. It could just be focused and reinvested within the team, the club, etc. Sheikh Jassim also promised to invest in the infrastructure of the team. So the training ground, the stadium, the transfers, the player acquisition, something that there is acquisition. There are, people investing in the players as well. But at the same time, financial fair play has been, United was fined by financial fair play this year. There have been issues with that recently, and eliminating the debt and being able to spend all that money on that would have been great. And also the investment into players would have been great for recruiting them as well. Improving the training ground, improving the academy, improving the stadium. That's only going to lead to more revenue for the club. And him pledging those investments, I don't believe that he would pledge them and then not go through with it. I think it would be a similar situation to, Man City, where they did a lot of, development in, the Etihad area north of Manchester. And I think Old Trafford and the surrounding area would have seen a similar boost, which would have been great for the, people of that area, as well as, the revenue for that team. The ability to grow that stand. I'm blanking on what it's called right now. There's a train station behind it. I think it might be the Sir Alex Ferguson stand. But to grow that, to add that additional layer, the additional level, I forget what the cost would be, or not the cost, what the benefit would be, but it's in the millions of dollars in revenue just adding those extra seats. And that's something that would go again towards the club's revenue, improve the financial fair play situation, and the amount of money that the club can spend each year. On top of that, the academy, right, the training facilities, the one thing that, was a good takeaway from Ronaldo's interview with that ghoul, Piers Morgan, is, he did mention that he left the club in 2009. And when he came back in 2021 or 2021, that everything was the same. It felt like he had, entered into the past. Right. So the training facilities were the same. The whirlpools had the same tiles. They were, cracked and mildewy and all that stuff. He said he loved them, but the same like food services staff was there. It felt like the club was stuck in the past. United's training ground, the stadium, when the Glazers took over, the facilities, they were all state of the art, or, at the forefront of what was expected in world soccer, world football. And they have not upgraded any of them or done significant upgrades on any of them since then. And it's gotten to the point where, the stadium's falling apart. It's rat infested. It rains on the fans. It leaked in the press box for a while. You think the one, group of people you don't want seeing that is the press. But of course, the press hasn't made a big deal about it, because they don't want to make excuses, about United and the ownership. They want to keep it to what's on the field for some reason, even though they're getting, rained on. But whatever, that's beside the point. Having Sheikh Jassim come in, he pledged to kind of improve all these situations. If you look at the youth team, and I know it's changed a little bit recently, but, it got to a point, I think in 2011 is when it started, 2012, 2013, around that time, all the best United players were sending their children to the Man City Academy. I think Robert Van Persie sent his kids there. I think Wayne Rooney initially sent his kids there. I believe Nemanja Matic, when he played later in the in the 2010s, like 2019, I think his kid might have gone to City. I could be making that up. Darren Fletcher's kids came through the City Academy. They're at United now, but they were poached from there. So, obviously, if the best players on your team are saying the best chance for their kids to succeed are going to one of your biggest rivals' academy, then, you have to rethink how we're doing things. And United's history is all about, bringing players through the youth team and developing them. And I'm not saying they should have some cushy state-of-the-art everything. It doesn't have to be, out of this world. They don't have to be spoiled, but at the same time, you want to make sure that they have the best opportunity to develop at a young age. And obviously, we weren't giving parents the feeling that, especially parents who had a choice, right? Not because they were like, oh, City came to me and United didn't. It's United players. So they obviously, if they wanted to, they could have sent their kids to the United Academy. But yeah, those are the main pros of the Sheikh Jassim ownership: no debt, investment in the facilities, training ground, the youth team, also the stadium, and development costs for the local area, and then also investment in the women's team, who sorely needed. Last season, they were going to the bathroom in porta potties at their training ground, which is completely unacceptable. So, from a club like United, everything should be top of the line, state of the art, best in class. And I think he would have taken steps to make sure everything was, in that realm. Now, with the Jim Ratcliffe takeover, first of all, he's only taking over 25% of the team. So how much can he affect change on all those other things which are established problems? Not necessarily, problems that, people are making up or we think it's a problem and it's not. These are things that have been identified within the club as problems. They know the stadium needs either to be completely overhauled or they need to build a brand new stadium. They also know the training facilities aren't where they need to be. It was brought to light, by Ronaldo interview and other people. And obviously, we've fallen behind teams like City and Arsenal and Newcastle and Liverpool on the pitch. We finished ahead of Newcastle and Liverpool last year. But Liverpool had a very down year after competing, to the finals or winning, in every major tournament they were in. They won the FA Cup, they won the Carabao Cup, and they lost the league, I believe, on the last day or on the last 2 days, and they lost the Champions League final. So they ended up having a bad year the following year because I think a lot of the football they had played, or so much football they played, in that previous season. And, they had a few injuries here and there, so things weren't looking good. But, they're having a bounce back year. I think they will this year. They have some new players, but I think they're, for the most part, playing okay. And they're going to keep coming because they have a great manager and their, owners are willing to kind of, make changes for the team. Newcastle, we finished ahead of Newcastle, but they're in and around it this year again, and they're owned by the Saudi Investment Fund. So, they've spent money on the infrastructure of the club, and, they're building a little bit slower and more gradually, but you have to think that within 5 years, they're going to be a club that, with their financial backing, as long as they keep making the decisions they're making, they're going to be in and around it moving forward. And, Man City, even though they have 111 charges pending, they're going to keep, doing what they're doing. So I think it's going to be difficult to remove these teams from the top 4 or top 5 or whatever it is needed to be in that, competing in the Champions League year in, year out, attract the best players and be able to, continually compete. United's pattern in the last 10 years since Sir Alex Ferguson retired has been, one of inconsistency. In the top 4, out of the top 4. Hire a manager, spend money, don't back them in year 2 or year 3, and then they end up not, underachieving and they get the sack. The way to make sure that they don't, continue in that cycle of inconsistency is to make sure the recruiting department is there, make sure the coaching is there, make sure the financial backing is there, and make sure everything is, humming and running properly continuously throughout those, throughout the next couple of years. At 25% of ownership, I wonder how much, control and how much of an effect, Sir Jim's going to be able to have. The rumor is that he's supposed to be taking over, his group's supposed to be taking over the sporting department, and hopefully, they're able to add some consistency there. There's rumors about Paul Mitchell, being available and being someone that they're going to call upon, which is interesting because Paul Mitchell left. He left Monaco, I think, in the beginning of the summer or end of last year. Edwin van der Sar left Ajax although they had some issues there. So it's possible, he had to step down because of that. And, he also had some health issues. So maybe he's not necessarily in the running. But, the Paul Mitchell one, it seems like there's guys out there who may be a, good fit for United. And, maybe that's something that they had in mind. They were talking to these guys and saying that if we take over, Sir Jim was talking to them and saying if he takes over, they would be considered for roles with the club. But you never know. That's just me, being a conspiracy theorist for a second. But, hopefully he's able to create a more consistent, more repeatable strategy for the footballing department and separating them from the business side and, making decisions that are for the betterment of the team and not necessarily for, this commercial entity or this financial tool for the Glazers to enrich themselves. That's like the best case scenario. And that's me hoping that's, this situation turns out well. The problem with that and why, this is troubling is, what sort of language in the contract, like what is the guarantees that, they are going to be able to get full control of the sporting project. Never mind that, Nice isn't doing that well. I think they've had like 1 or 2 decent years, but that project hasn't been great. And from what I understand, the fans of the club aren't happy with them. Since they took over, they haven't really improved the club. It's not been doing any better than it was in the years before he took over, from what I understand. But, assuming that he will be better than the Glazers from this point of view, and he's able to put a team in place that, hypothetically is focused on the footballing part and, it's state-of-the-art scouting methods, coaching, the physio department, the doctors, et cetera. Let's say he's able to put that into place. Where is the money going to come from to fund all this stuff? We still have the debt in place, right? So United still needs to service the debt. The money that he's investing now, the 1.3 billion, that's going to purchasing shares and buying into the club. Is he going to turn around and tell the Glazers, okay, this money that I gave you, you now need to reinvest into the club? I don't think he can do that. And nothing about what the Glazers have done in the last, 18 years, 19 years has said that that's something that they're willing to do. So, that's a concern for me as well. And then again, where's the money for the stadium going to come from? Where's the money for the training ground improvements going to come from? Is the women's team going to get any improvements? They're definitely not doing any redeveloping of the stadium or the area around there. I mean, I know Ineos has the money to do these things, but Ineos is a public company beholden to shareholders. They're not going to do these things unless they know they're getting a significant return on their investment. And that's something that, maybe, grounds redevelopment you could sell. You're building shopping malls or whatever it is. There's a huge mall in Trafford anyway. But maybe you're building condos and they expect to see a return on investment. Maybe there's some sort of charitable aspect or something along those lines. I don't know. But, all these other things, United's business model currently run by the Glazers is, to spend as little money as possible so you can, extract as much money as possible from the team. And, yes, you have to spend on transfers, but that's more to make sure the team can compete as much as possible, play as deep as they can in every tournament so they get more home games, make sure they're in the Champions League so they get, a higher payout from the sponsors, from the TV sponsors, their, shirt sponsors, et cetera. That's really the model right now. And I don't see how Sir Jim coming in changes that model. So who's to say in 3 years, if things turn around, we're able to be a little bit more consistent on the field, on the pitch, then who's to say the Glazers are going to go anywhere? Or they're not going to say, okay, we've righted the ship, we've been able to win things. We feel comfortable taking out dividends again, 20 million, 30 million a season, right? There's no guarantee that's not going to happen. And until we see some sort of paperwork that's ironclad that ensures us that, this is going to be a takeover that is guaranteed to happen, the Glazers will all leave, and the financial model of the team is going to change, then, it's hard to be optimistic about this, takeover moving forward.